arrow in the bottom right corner. I think we're live here, so keep that in mind.
And it's, okay.
Person should be able to see the live chat, response to anything. Start broadcast when you're ready to go live. We are live. One viewer. Hello. Top right will say live when you are live. Start. 3 minutes. I'm gonna shut the door. See if I have my nations failing.
It's recording.
It is. Are you ready? Okay. So let's I want to just make sure I'm going to go here. I want to make sure we're done broadcasting. Okay, let's check my email. They can't see my screen. Never mind now. I can hear you, but we don't currently see you. We are going. Remember, we're right here.
I keep forgetting that the camera's up
Hi.
here. Hi,
I'm Karen McDaniel,
and I'm Jose Mendez.
and welcome to my office. This is my office. We're in the Computing Commons on the Arizona State University campus in Tempe, Arizona, and we're remembering to talk to the camera and not to the screen. We're happy to have you here. Hopefully you're viewing us live. There were, I think there was one question posted in the discussion forums for some suggestions on books about economics when the class is over. My background is in macroeconomics, and I particularly enjoyed the book Why Nations Fail. That book was written by Robinson and Acemoglu.
Acemoglu, yes.
Acemoglu. It's particularly good. It's a particularly interesting book if you're interested in why some economies developed the way they did and some economies have not. I recommend that book.
The book I read, well, my area is in international trade, and a major author in the area of international trade who's a little bit skeptical about the arguments that that economists make in general is a Harvard economist named Danny Roderick. And he's written a very interesting book, and it's called Economics Rules. And it's made for first to third year undergraduates, so it's very accessible. I recommend reading it because it gives you an idea of what is it the economists do, why we think the way we do. And he provides surprisingly enough, he provides a very strong defense of our approach, even though he is still willing to show the wrinkles in our face, so to speak, or the problems with the economic approach. So what we thought we would do, we've written questions. We have homework questions, of course, and we have quiz questions. But there's some questions that we thought that might be, at least in the section on market interventions, that are a bit more. That I would like to elaborate a little bit more, that I didn't illustrate in my portion in my videos. So these are more of an application, and I want to walk through how you would go about solving and obtaining answers to these questions. And they're in the area of international trade, in particular tariffs, calculating the effects of tariffs and calculating the effects of import quotas.
Okay, so I'm going to let Jose walk you through his example, and I'll step out of the frame here, and then I'll come back and I'll talk about I'll walk us through a firm optimization problem.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with the simple supply and demand diagram, and it's going to be for a small nation in international trade, and this nation will ultimately set a tariff on this particular good. And so we're going to calculate, for instance, how producer surplus changes. We're going to come up with a dollar amount. We'll see how consumers are impacted by the tariff, also come up with a dollar amount. We'll even be able to calculate the amount of revenue collected. So the first thing I want to do is draw the graph. So here's the graph. I'm just checking to make sure that you can see what I've written here. Okay, so here's the supply curve, the domestic supply curve. And here's the domestic demand curve. Here's the quantity axis. Here's the price axis. And recall, since it's a small country in international trade, the price of the imported product is going to be drawn as a straight line, meaning that this country has no ability to alter the price of the product. And now I'm going to start out with some numbers here. I'm going to put, this is going to be $8. The quantity supplied at $8 by domestic producers is 6 units. And the quantity demanded by domestic consumers is 24. So there we have what we would call the equilibrium when the country's engaged in free trade. Notice, this is the amount supplied by domestic producers, the distance from here to here, 6 units. The distance from here to here is 18 units, and that happens to be the volume of imports entering the country. And both domestic units and the imported product is sold at $8. Now, let's suppose that the government has decided to protect domestic producers, or maybe just needs to collect revenue, and so it implements a $2 tariff. Now, what that's going to do is, since they can't influence the world price of the product, the price within the market is now going to be $8 plus the $2 of the tariff. And so that's going to mean that this curve, in effect, shifts upwards. So the supply of imports curve is now a horizontal line. It's going to be, you can write that as PW plus the amount of the tariff, which of course in this case, that means it's going to be $8 plus the $2. The new internal price of this product, because it's a small country in international trade, is $10. Now let's see some of the impact of this higher price. Well, domestic producers are going to respond because now they're able to sell their product at a higher price. That's going to stimulate sales of their product, production of their product, and so they're going to move up the demand curve, up their supply curve to where it intersects with the new price curve, and they're going to move and produce 8 units. So here's this line indicates by how much domestic production has expanded. Now let's look at demand. Consumers at a price of $8 were willing to consume 24 units, but the tariff, now that the price of the product is more expensive, they move back up along their demand curve, and at a price of $10, their quantity demanded now shrinks somewhat to 20 units. So you can see in the small country case, you can see that the price of the product will go up with the tariff. The amount that domestic producers produce expands by 2 units. And the overall amount that domestic consumers consume falls by 4 units. The quantity demanded falls to 20. And notice that these 2 arrows indicate that imports have declined as well. They've fallen from a total of 18 units, which is 24 minus 6, now to just 20 minus 8, or 12 units. So they've gone to 12 units when before they were 18 units. And those are the sort of the what we call the positive effects of a tariff, meaning that those are things that happen. We don't assign any particular meaning to this, whether this is a good thing or not. It's just what occurs. Now, we want to move into talking about, well, what do these mean for different groups within society? What does this mean to consumers? What does this mean to producers? And for that, now we're going to turn to normative analysis. And let's look first at producers. And if you recall from my earlier videos, this area that I'm putting a little, I hope you can see in dash, this blue area, that was producer surplus prior to the price increase. Okay? Now, with the tariff, if you notice, this area of producer surplus, remember the definition of producer surplus, it's the area below the price but above the supply curve. And so producer surplus has now expanded by the area which has the blue arrows. We can actually put a dollar amount on the increase in producer surplus with the information that I've provided. Notice that we can break up this into 2 parts, this area into 2 parts. This is a rectangle. We have a rectangle and we have a triangle. Okay? So we have a triangle and we have a rectangle. And so to find out by how much producer surplus has increased, we simply need to add the 2 areas. And so to get the rectangle, if you recall the formula for an area, is 1/2 the height times the width. Well, 1/2 the height is $2. The height is the price increase, so that's $2. The width is 6 units, the original 6 units times 6. So the area of the rectangle can be calculated as follows. And do you see that up there? Am I showing that up there?
You are. I was worried for a little bit that we're backwards, but I think we're fine.
Okay, because that area can be seen.
No.
Okay, if it can't be seen, let me lower it. 1/2 times $2 times 6 units equals $6. So the rectangle, which is one part of what we have to calculate, is 6 units, is $6. So that's one. Now we need to calculate the triangle that goes along, that is the second part of the increase in producer surplus. Now the triangle, if you recall, the formula for a triangle, oh, excuse me, I was calculated, I made an error here. I was calculating the area for a triangle. So do we have an eraser?
We do.
Wow. Glad I caught myself. There we go. The area of a rectangle is $2 times 6, or $12. Okay? The height times the width. Now, the area of this triangle is 1/2 the height, which is the price increase of $2, times the increase, the horizontal distance, or the width, which is 2 times 2, and that gives us $2. This cancels out with that, so we're left like that. So $14. We're left with $14. $14 represents this rectangle plus the sum of that triangle. So producer surplus is expanded by the dollar amount of $14. So producers are better off by $14. What about the government? What about what happens to government revenue? Well, government revenue is the $2 tariff, applied to the 12 units that are imported. So $2 times the 12 units that are imported are $24. And that is represented by the height, which is $2, the volume of imports, which is 12. So this area then represents the increase in revenue to the government, and that's 2 times 12, or $24. So a $24 increase in government revenue. All right, let's turn to the last group. So the government gets revenue, obtains revenue, producers gain $14. What about the last group, which is, of course, is consumers? Now, consumers, originally, their consumer surplus was all of this triangle, starting from up here, all the way down to this point where the original price of $8 intersects the demand curve across. Okay, so this triangle represents all of consumer surplus. And remember the definition: the area below the demand curve, but above the price that they're actually paying for those units. That now shrinks to this smaller triangle. So consumer surplus has shrunk from this larger triangle down to this smaller one. Well, we can put a dollar amount on the amount of consumer surplus that consumers lost. And to do that, we can do that very quickly, because notice, once again, this area that I'm outlining with my finger represents the loss in consumer surplus. In fact, I'll use a little different color here. I'll use red here to outline the loss in consumer surplus. That area is the loss in consumer surplus. So consumers lose that area. Well, can we put a dollar amount on it? Yes, we can. Notice again that this is a rectangle and this is a triangle. So let's calculate the dollar amounts involved. So this, the height of this is $2 and the length, the width is 20. So this rectangle here is $40. So this rectangle in red is $40. Now we had to add in this portion, which is of course 1/2 the height times the width. Well, it's the height is $2 and the width is $4. So 2 times 4 is $8. Multiplied by 1/2 is $4. So that triangle is $4. So overall then that sums to $44. So consumers have lost a total of $44 in consumer surplus. Okay, consumers have lost a total of $44 in consumer. So with this information, now that we know how all the different groups within society have been impacted by the $2, the imposition of a $2 tariff, we can take that information and we can actually figure we can actually calculate what happens to the nation as a whole. And to do that, I'm going to move over here to the right, and I'm going to write, okay, consumers lose a minus $44 of consumer surplus. Okay. Producers gain, let's see, $14 of producer surplus. Consumers lose $44, producers gain 14. The government gains 40, did we say? That's right. 24, sorry. $24. Thanks, Kara. Plus 24. So what do we get there? We get, if we add this all up, we get this is 3, this is 8, 38 minus 6.
44, yep, 6.
Minus 6. So the nation as a whole, the national welfare or its economic well-being declines by minus $6. Okay, where is that area represented? Where are the $6? Well, that area is represented right here. It's the sum of this triangle, the production efficiency loss, the fact that we're encouraging less efficient, less productive domestic industries to substitute for imports, plus this area here that consumers lost. So the two green triangles represent the loss to the nation as a consequence of imposing this tariff. Right? So now I'm going to turn it over. So hopefully I've illustrated, I've given you an application of how if you have numbers, you can calculate the dollar amounts of each of the areas. If you have any questions about this, be sure and post a question. Now I'm turning over to Kara.
Hello. Hopefully we're going to stop being blurry here, and I've confirmed that we are facing the right direction. So thank you, Jose. What I want to do is talk about the steps that we go through, maybe for thinking about linking the pieces of production, isoquants, isocosts, cost curves, and profit maximization. So I'm going to walk us all the way through an example. And I'll talk to Jose here, who may be able to provide us some insight and who can also check and see what we look like. Here, this is our view. So now I've confirmed that we're facing the right way. I thought we were backwards, but we don't see all that. Let's change this here. Okay. Let's think about a firm that produces t-shirts. Now, we think about maybe a firm that produces white t-shirts. This good is not differentiated, so we're gonna, when we talk about market structure, we'll think about this firm as being perfectly competitive. So the t-shirt firm uses a production technology, and the firm is going to combine land, labor, and capital to produce output. And we'll think about the land as maybe the factory that our manufacturer uses. And in the short run, that factory is going to be fixed. We can think about maybe the firm has a multi-year lease on the factory or owns the factory and can't expand it or contract it in a short period of time. The firm is also going to use capital. So we can think about capital as maybe the machines that help the workers cut and sew the cloth to make the t-shirts, and labor. We're going to skip our production function, and we're going to jump right to looking at our isoquant. So we can represent the multiple quantities of labor or workers and machines required to produce some fixed number of t-shirts. Let's make this isoquant represent a quantity of 20 t-shirts per hour. So let's say that if a firm wants to, our production firm wants to produce 20 t-shirts per hour, it needs to hire 20 workers and use, like this, 5 machines, or depending on the type of machines it's using, it could probably produce 20 t-shirts per hour if it hires 15 machines and 5 workers. Now this isoquant represents the combination of inputs that can produce 20 t-shirts per hour, and not any other quantity. We'll expand this to include other quantities later. So let's think about the information that we have from this isoquant. We can look here. Here's the, that's no good. How about that? Here's the slope of the isoquant at the input combination 5, 15. So what does this slope represent? Jose, do you remember? Putting you on the spot?
You are putting me on the spot.
That's okay. Well, I'll just like in a normal lecture, I would ask a student, can anyone tell me what the slope of an isoquant at any given point represents? And that's
some sort of marginal.
That's the marginal product of labor relative to the marginal product of capital, which as economists we use K and L. Okay, so here, and it's a downward sloping curve, so we have a negative sign, that we don't interpret it. Now, that's all very interesting, but we could also produce 20 t-shirts per hour if we use the combination of 20 units of labor and 5 machines, and we could take a look at this slope right here. And what we see is this slope is different than this one. So here we have marginal product of labor divided by the marginal product of capital at this point. Well, I'm sure Jose remembers the answer to this question. What happens to the marginal product of labor as we increase the quantity of labor that we use?
It diminishes.
It diminishes. We experience diminishing marginal return. So as we move this direction, the marginal product of labor is going to fall. Now, what over here, we're using more labor and less capital than we are here. Here we're using less labor and more capital. What happens to the marginal product of capital if we decrease the quantity of capital that we're using? We're going backwards here, so it's a little tougher to think about. So as we reduce the quantity of capital, the marginal product of capital, as we go this direction, increases. So that's why this slope is flatter than this slope. So the marginal product of labor relative to capital over here is much greater than here. So how many workers and how many machines should our t-shirt producer hire? What information do we need to answer that question? We need to know how much workers cost and how much machines cost. So before we can say, aha, our firm should use this quantity of inputs or this quantity of inputs, provided it wants to produce 20 t-shirts per hour, we need to know how much labor and capital cost. So let's say can we see? Let's say workers cost $100 per hour. And our machines cost $200 per hour. So if our workers cost $100 per hour and our machines cost $200 per hour, we can use this information to construct ISO cost curves. So here's our ISO quant. Let's construct ISO cost. And as a side note, we remember ISO is just a funny word that means same, or Greek word means same quantity, same cost. So we want to, let's say we construct the ISO cost curve, assuming that our firm is going to spend $1,000. Can you see that, or is that too faint?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so let's say our firm wants to spend $1,000. If our firm spends $1,000 and spends it all on workers, how many workers can it hire? Jose?
Oh, that's too challenging.
$1,000, and each worker costs $100 an hour.
10?
10. And alternatively, let's suppose we take this, all this $1,000 and spend it all on machines. Well, machines cost $200 an hour. That means we can hire 5 machines. So one of our ISO cost curves is represented right here. Let's see if we can get a better one. Not too bad. Now, let's take a look. So if we see this picture here, we should be able to conclude that our t-shirt firm is not going to be able to produce 20 t-shirts an hour and spend only $1,000 an hour. So we're going to need to do better than that. And so if we want to spend more, we can construct multiple ISO cost curves, each representing a different expenditure amount. And it looks like we've got one touching right here and continuing out. We could draw as many of these in as we want. There's theoretically an infinite number of these ISO cost curves, but what we're looking for is the ISO cost curve that allows our firm to produce 20 t-shirts an hour at the lowest cost. So if we look here, our firm can produce 20 t-shirts an hour at any point along this isoquant. Our firm can choose this point here, our firm can choose this point here, or our firm can choose this point here. Of the points that I have drawn here, let's call this 14.6. Let's call this 12 and 7. That looks pretty good. And this one down here is, let's call this 27 and 3. Which one is the cheapest? Well, we could go back to our data here, our numbers, and calculate the value. Or we could recall that the lowest cost is the lowest ISO cost curve. So this is the best our firm can do. So our firm hires 12 workers and 7 machines. 12 workers are going to cost 12 times 100. It's $1,200. 7 machines are 7 times 200. That's 1,400. So 12, 14, 24, $2,600 per hour. That's the cheapest that our t-shirt firm can produce 20 t-shirts an hour. Now, we're going to save this information. And we're going to say, okay, $2,600 is total variable cost at Q is equal to 20. I think we can still see that. Yep. This was one, I've made something of a mess here, but this is one isoquant for Q is equal to 20. And we figured out how we find the cost minimizing quantity. Now I'm going to clean this up because there's something I forgot to mention that I want to mention. We remember this, marginal product of labor, marginal product of capital. Right here, we've got marginal product of labor divided by the marginal product of capital. We also have our ISO cost curve. So these two slopes are the same. What's the slope of our ISO cost curve? Our slope of our ISO cost curve is our rise over run. I hope this works out. Does it not work out? Mm-hmm. It works out? Okay. So this is our slope of our ISO cost curve. If we remember from the videos, that's going to be equal to the wage, which is 1,000. Oh wait, no, 100, divided by the rental rate of capital, which is 200. So the slope of both our isoquant and our ISO cost is going to be -1/2. Relative productivity of labor and capital equal to relative price of labor and capital. That's the best our firm can do. Now, if our firm chose instead, now we're going to clean up the mess. We've got Q is equal to 20. Let's say Q is equal to 24, 28. We could go through the same process using our information on the cost of labor and the cost of capital. We go through the same process to find the cost minimizing input quantity and then we find those total costs. So we take these numbers and we can move to constructing our total variable cost curve. And I'm going to draw that here. We'll move on from this, but we'll remember how we did it. So we only have one point here, but if we went through that same process and found the cost minimizing output quantity, if we wanted to produce 24 t-shirts an hour, given this wage and rental rate, we could find our total variable cost. And what do you think? Is it going to be higher, lower, the same? Naturally higher, right? So as we've shown in the video, as we produce more output, total costs increase. And by how much? Well, that depends on our production technology. But let's say that's $2,800. And our total variable cost curve maybe looks something like this. Well, this isn't particularly interesting. But there's still information here that's useful for us as we move on. So from this total variable cost curve, we can find marginal cost and average variable cost. We also might want to have information about average total cost, but what information do we need for average total cost that we don't have, that I didn't give us here? What is fixed costs? So what should we make our fixed costs, Jose?
Let's make it 200.
200. So that's like saying 200. We're talking about shirts per hour. So it's like saying the factory is going to cost $200 per hour to run, and we have to pay this whether we're making the shirts or not. So even if we just walk away from our factory, we still have to pay. The rent on it. We've leased it, or maybe we still have to pay some utilities to keep it operating. So we have to pay this fixed cost regardless. So yes.
It could be a small house with 4 sewing machines in El Salvador.
It could. It doesn't have to be a huge factory. It could be. We could be talking about 2 people working or 2 to 4 people working in a small house. But we think there's even if this is a really small operation, we like to think about costs as the ones that are variable, the ones that we could change fairly quickly. I know maybe it's hard to get a sewing machine, but if we wanted a new sewing machine, maybe we could find one in a week. But we'd have a hard time getting another house.
Hey, we're recording.
So now we can draw our total cost curve, and our I don't know, we can't quite see that over here. I'll shrink it down. There's our total cost curve. And so the difference between total variable and total costs, this is always fixed. And in our case, we decided it's $200. So looking at this, we see that costs are increasing as we increase the units we produce. Our variable costs increase, and by definition, so do our total costs. Well, how much are they increasing? As we increase units of output, our costs increase, but maybe the amount that they increase is not constant. Maybe as we increase production 1 unit, the additional costs that we incur increase. That's our marginal cost. So our marginal cost is the change in our total variable cost as we increase output. And this picture here is interesting, but it's even more interesting to look at our marginal cost curve. So let's erase this and look at marginal cost. So maybe that first unit costs us $2. That first t-shirt cost $2 to produce. Maybe I like 1 better. Let's make it cheap. And then the second unit maybe costs $1.25 or $1.25 to produce. So the second unit costs more than the first unit to produce. So maybe our marginal cost curve is increasing. Each additional t-shirt that we produce costs us more than the previous one. That's not a bad thing. That's just the way production works. We have a constant return to scale production technology. The building, be it a large factory or a small house that we're using to produce t-shirts, is fixed. We can vary labor and capital, but each additional unit of labor and capital, we experience diminishing marginal returns, and one of our units is fixed. So an increasing marginal cost curve isn't a sign of bad business. It's just the way our constraint works. So you remember when we produced 20 units of output, our total variable costs were $2,600. So let's change our scale here so we can see it a little better. Let's make this 20. This will be 10. This will be 30. So 2,600 divided by 20 is
130.
130? $130 a shirt per hour?
They're designer t-shirts.
They must be super fancy. Wow. Oh, I see. Maybe we should lop some zeros off here. What do we think? Should we lop some zeros off?
Yes.
Let's lop some zeros off. Yeah. Those $100 an hour, that's pretty good. I'm gonna go work making shirts. So we're gonna lob some dollars off.
$13.
So now that's a $13 shirt. Okay, we can live with. That's still pretty fancy, isn't it? More than I would like to pay. But so our let's say our average variable costs, our total variable costs are $260. If we divide by 20, then our average variable costs are $13. And then let's put $13 right here. So if our average variable costs are $260 and our average fixed $13, well, average fixed cost, how much is our average fixed cost if we produce 20 units of output?
$10.
$10. And so if we take $10 and add it to our average variable cost, that's 23. Fancy shirts. There's our average total cost. Well, we only have 2 points here on our graph. But what do we remember about our total variable costs as we increased output? Well, our total variable costs as we increased output increased, and we also had increasing marginal cost. So every additional unit costs us more than the last one. So we know that our average variable costs have to increase forever after. And our marginal cost is going to be greater than our average variable cost. So if we produce some quantity lower, our average variable cost will be lower. So here's our average variable cost curve. Now, what's more interesting is our average total costs. So our average total costs may or may not increase as we produce more output. Correct? Right? So let's think about what happens to our average fixed cost as we increase output. It's always declining because we have to pay $200 no matter what. So if we produce one t-shirt, our average fixed cost is $200. If we produce 10 t-shirts, our average fixed costs are $20. 20 t-shirts, $10, and so on. So our average fixed cost is always falling. Now, our average total costs are falling for some quantities of output and rising with others. And how do we know? Well, if our average total costs are greater than our marginal costs, let's think about what that means. That means the next t-shirt that we produce costs us less than the average t-shirt. So the next t-shirt we produce will bring our average down. And so the next, if we go from 20 to 21, our average will fall. And it will keep falling until we reach the point where average total cost is equal to marginal cost. Here, right at this point, looks like 25 to me. Right here at this point, the next t-shirt costs us what the average t-shirt costs us. So the average won't change. But then the one after that costs more. And then the one after that costs more. And forever after. So our average total costs are going to rise. Now, if we back up to something earlier than 20, it's still true that over here, marginal costs are less than average total costs, so we'll be bringing the average down. So we can, our average total cost curve ends up being U-shaped. So far, we've gone from isoquants and isocost curves to average total cost curves and marginal cost curves, but we still don't know how many t-shirts our firm is going to produce. So if we don't know how many t-shirts our firm is going to produce, what kind of information do we need? We need information on what kind of market this firm is operating in. Now we're supposing that, let's suppose this market is perfectly competitive. That means that our firm's t-shirts aren't any different than another firm's t-shirts, and you won't be able to tell the difference between this producer's t-shirts and another producer's t-shirts when you go to the store. So our firm is going to take the price of t-shirts as given. So let us pick a price for t-shirts. How much should a t-shirt, these are going to be super fancy t-shirts, but we're still not able to differentiate them. How much should a t-shirt cost?
Wow, let's say $22?
$22. Okay, so let's say each t-shirt costs $22. That means that every single t-shirt that this firm sells, it can collect $22 in revenue. So price is equal to 22. And then every t-shirt that this firm sells, it collects an additional $22 in revenue. So what does that sound like, Jose? Marginal revenue. Anytime we say each additional, we're thinking marginal. Marginal revenue is equal to $22. So in a perfectly competitive market, price is equal to marginal revenue. Now, let's draw in $22. Can we use green? Does green work? I think 22 will be right here. So let's suppose that I recommend, as the manager of this t-shirt factory, that we produce 30 t-shirts an hour. And I recommend 30 t-shirts an hour. And then I confer with my colleague, Jose, who has taken principles of microeconomics. And what will my colleague, Jose, tell me after taking principles of microeconomics? I say, okay, each t-shirt we get to collect $22 an hour. This looks like 25. The 30th t-shirt cost us $25 to produce. What is my colleague going to tell me?
Producing too much.
We're producing too much. This shirt right here, I only got to collect $22 on it, and it cost me $25 to produce. We're facing increasing marginal costs, so we should back up a bit. Cool off, not produce as many t-shirts. So we're going to take a look at some different quantities. Maybe we choose 20. I say, okay, if we produce 20 t-shirts an hour, it looks like the 20th t-shirt cost us $20. And should we produce that t-shirt? Should we produce the 20th t-shirt? Yes, we should, because it only cost us $20 to produce, and we got to collect $22 on it. Maybe we think, well, let's try one more and try one more until it looks like, I'm going to call this 24 t-shirts, where the point where marginal revenue is exactly equal to marginal cost. Now we have found the quantity. This is the best we can do. We cannot earn any more profits than we are earning when we choose marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And in a perfectly competitive market, price is equal to marginal cost. So, once again, we've made something of a mess here. Let's try to clean it up. And in these last 5 minutes, let's look at the information that we can gather from our graph. So we've got our profit maximizing output quantity is 24. This is important here, so I'm leaving our 25 here, which is the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Here's our average variable cost. It's probably lower than that. We have to make sure we get a fixed cost of $200. So if we look at this graph right here, we can represent our total revenue, our total costs, total profits, total fixed costs in areas on this graph. So you could, if we had a system of equations, we could calculate the same thing. So one of the things that's great about microeconomics is we can display an awful lot of information in this picture right here. So let's first calculate total revenue. I got some room down here. So total revenue, this is equal to price times quantity. Now, we've decided that our quantity is 24, and our price is 22. 22 times 24 is our total revenue. Now I can't do it in my head.
284. 284.
This is going to be 8, so
Is it 284?
no, because it's going to maybe it is. I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, that sounds right. Okay, that sounds pretty good. 284. All right, so our total revenue, 284, we think, is price times quantity. As Jose reminded us earlier, the area of a rectangle is the height times the base. So we can represent total revenue, and I'm going to shade it in red, in green, just like in your interactives, is this area here. Now, total cost. So one thing we didn't mention here is, are we turning a profit, Jose?
No, we're not.
No, we're earning a loss, and we can tell because on average, each unit costs us more than what we marginally collect. So we are earning a loss. Here's our total cost. Why don't we just shut down? Walk away. Because we still have to pay these $200. And the loss that we're earning here is less than $200. So we do better for producing, but we're still earning a loss. So our total costs exceed our total revenue. So here are our profits, and I'm putting them in red, just like in your
loss.
interactive, because it's a loss.
Loss of $12.
It's a loss of $12. Now 12,
50 cents times
50
12,
cents, yep.
24.
So this right here, we're going to say this is $22.50. We're losing $12. Losing $12 is better than losing $200, so we're going to continue to produce. Now, another way of thinking about it is that the difference between our average total cost and our average variable cost, this here is our total fixed cost. And we have to make sure that we did our numbers right, because no matter where we are in the graph, that's equal to $200. So Jose, we're earning a loss of $12. We're making t-shirts. What should we do once our lease is up?
Shut down.
We're going to not just shut down.
Leave the industry.
We're going to exit the industry. And when we exit the industry, we are no longer producing t-shirts. So what happens to the supply of t-shirts?
Decline.
Declines. The supply of t-shirts declines. There's fewer producers, and eventually the number of t-shirt producers declines, and as supply decreases, prices will rise until eventually no firms earn profits, and the most
Or losses.
profits or losses. Nobody earns a profit, nobody earns a loss, and we can think about our market being in a long-run equilibrium, and the price of a t-shirt is going to be $22.50. So I hope you enjoyed our live session. We enjoyed being here with you. Hopefully you come and see us next time, and we'll go over some questions that you might have to help you study for the final. Have a good weekend.